Azeem, that wasn't very enthusiastic for democracy, was it? I don't feel very...
Should we get a cheer for democracy, please? Woo!
Much better. I feel better now.
Let's go.
Yeah.
That's better. Yeah. No, we need to this year. Maybe we should start, Lisa and Robyn, with like brief intros, like one-sentence intro. So I'm an author, and I look at the intersection between changing technologies and how it will impact society in the most broad ways. And I'm Azeem.
Religious reader of Exponential View. First of all, I feel that's mandatory.
How many subscribers here in the audience? Got some work to do, Azeem.
Yeah, I've got some work.
Strongly recommend it.
Co-founder of Apolitical along with Lisa. I now run it. We are a global network and learning platform for government used by more than 200,000 public servants in 160 different countries to equip themselves for the 21st century.
And I'm one of those weird people who, since the time I can remember, loved politics, and see it as a force for good. So I'm a lifelong political entrepreneur. And I now, after co-founding Apolitical with Robyn, run our foundation, which is about getting the 21st century political leaders we need, which we'll talk more about.
Thank you, Lisa and Robyn. Let's maybe start by also understanding who is in the audience. So just as a brief show of hands, if you are and no judgment, if you're a politician involved in policy making or in government, could you pop your hand up just so we get a sense? We've got a few.
Be proud.
Be proud.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's Mario.
Yeah. Great.
Hi, Mario.
Good. Well, so I think maybe we should start by tackling the elephant in the room around this topic of AI and democracy, which I would say often comes from the starting point of phrases like the YouTube algorithm destroyed democracy, or democracy is deeply under threat because of the torrent of AI-based misinformation that's about to hit this. Now, we had a discussion earlier, Lisa, about whether that's really the right way to frame our discussion, and maybe I can just turn to you and we can put that to rest.
Well, number one, I think there's been a lot of discussion about AI and governance, how it should be governed or not. We're not talking about that now. And there's a lot of like deep fake doom, which there's reasons to be worried about it, although a lot of evidence is showing that it just reconfirms people's confirmation bias. The one part we are seeing that is really worrying, and there's a bright spot to it that maybe we'll get to later, is that the push on the deep fakes are really impacting the people who go into office and the people who stay in office. So for example, there's some evidence coming up that 1 out of 6 women do not finish their first term in office because of deep fake porn or violent threats enabled by AI. So we are seeing how that is a doomy part of what we're seeing about deep fakes.
Right, and I think that is the kind of crunchiness that we're going to get from Robyn and Lisa, which is that when we look at that question, it turns out that where the pain is on the talent pipeline and on the retention and participation of different types of people in the political process. So Robyn, if I could just come to you on that question, you're running Apolitical, and a lot of what Apolitical is about is developing the capabilities within the full life cycle of someone in politics. So how do we think about how that changes because of the changing nature of the underlying technology? Like, what are the capabilities you think people need to have in order to be effective public servants?
Well, just bridging from Lisa's note of optimism, first of all, who's net positive about the impact of government, of AI on government and democracy? Okay, so definitely not a majority. Interestingly, because we love to think of government as technophobic, public servants, because we're polling them all the time all over the world, are net positive by quite a sizable margin. So I think, first of all, that tells you something important. In terms of the cycle, we think of what we call a healthy democracy flywheel. So you need citizens participating, engaged in free and fair elections, electing ethical leaders who are informed, who then work with civil servants to deliver on the manifesto promises. So Apolitical itself, the B corporation that I run, Lisa works on the political pipeline side, works on equipping civil servants for the future, or the present rather. They're still often operating in the 20th, sometimes 19th century. Some of the big themes we see are AI, climate, these big forces rewiring societies and economies and equipping them for that. And on AI, what's really interesting is it's not a technology where governments ignoring it. Everyone knows it's important, and I'll just tell you one anecdote that speaks volumes. I met with a very senior official recently who said, I know I need to do something on AI. I don't know how to think about it. I have set up an AI lab. I've never used it. It was like if they used it, ChatGPT might turn them to stone. I get briefed by my team. And that's kind of, I think, representative of where government's at right now. Hasn't fully rolled up its sleeves except for younger generations within government.
Yeah. You know, that example reminds me quite a lot about how old industry dealt with the internet. So I remember in 1999, I was advising the boss of a mobile operator, and he said to me, I will never connect my billing system to the internet. A customer will never be able to pay their bill. They won't be able to see their bill. He was right, because he was fired a year later. But what happened in 99 was that the bosses didn't get involved in the technology. And what we've seen with AI is that it's being driven by the C-suite in organizations. And I'm curious, because I spent some time with Kaja Kallas, Prime Minister of Estonia, this summer, and I came away from that conversation thinking, as she talked about government services, she sounded like someone who had been the head of user experience at one of the leading digital agencies. It was so fluent for her. Is that just a generational thing, or is that something that you're starting to see differences emerge across the 150 government nations that you work with?
I think it's somewhat generational, for sure, but it's also somewhat regional. I mean, in Northern Europe, there is such a centre of excellence around technology in government. It's very spotty and variable across countries. There's often adoption driven by a crisis. I mean, COVID massively accelerated technological adoption. That wave has somewhat receded. Some countries have kept it. I think if you look at what's happening in Ukraine since the war and how they've just digitized everything, and there's been a huge acceleration as a result of that. So there is no perfectly elegant trend to point to.
But is there any evidence that delivering better quality services through a shiny website improves how citizens feel about the political process and about government? Because I go around and I tell people that, and maybe I've made up, maybe that's fake news.
Well, there's conflicting evidence. Do you want to speak to one part and I'll speak to the other?
Yeah, I mean, there has been sort of common wisdom that if governments get better at delivering services, then citizens will feel better about their governments. But we're not seeing that actually turn out, because there's a gap between perception and reality. If you look at the election coming up in my country, there's basically no bump for any of the policies that Joe Biden has done. There's no delivery bump at all. So people are saying this is the end of deliverism, and what really matters is perception. I'm just going to tell a quick story from a country that I was talking to someone in the Prime Minister's office who was really worried about the lack of trust that was growing in their country. And so she was like, I'm going to take this on, and we're going to do citizen agenda setting for our government. No more politicians setting the agenda, the citizens are. She goes out. They have all throughout the country, libraries and tea and coffee and old and young and new, and they are very shiny, show the 23 agenda items that the citizens want. They show it to the politicians, and the politicians say, great, 22 of them we're already doing. So there's a gap often between what's happening and what we're communicating. And I know, Mario, here, this is something you think a lot about. Like, how do we communicate what we do? And I think that's the promise a bit for AI, is can you customize what the government's doing for you? You need to be reskilled. I'm going to show you exactly, because I know your age and I know your job and I have a special program for you. It's this customization, this mass data, I think is super exciting.
And it allows much less expensive and much more continuous engagement. And the slightly contradictory emerging research, which I heard from the head of a big government agency in a country that won't be named, is that there's emerging research suggesting that your frequency of interaction, of touching the state, improves your relationship and trust in government, even if those experiences are bad. So AI can increase, at its best, can increase both the frequency and the quality of those touch points.
Well, I just want to go back to what democracy is, right? I mean, one of the things that people think democracy is obviously free and fair elections. It's also minority rights, and it's also limited government, if you look at what the definition is. And I think the promise of democracy is that. It's really, of AI, is if we do it right, we can return a lot of the complex decisions to the citizens. Now, I'm not one of these Pollyanna, the citizens are always going to get it right. We know that that doesn't happen. But we could get much more complex sentiment analysis, not yes, no. Quadratic voting and different ways of doing things are quite exciting. And what I find really interesting about what Robyn says, and Azeem, you and I have talked about this in years past, is that we know in brain science that trust is proximal. So if you are a government right now, you should be thinking about how close you can get. That's when I work with politicians to say, how close can you get to the people on a regular basis? Trust will go up even if they disagree with you, if they see you.
Well,
and that is if they don't kill you, which is a real issue, right? So the political violence is real.
So let's pull out a couple of those threads. And I think just for the audience, one thing that's really clear is that the data is somewhat conflicting. The data is conflicting about the extent to which the YouTube algorithm destroyed democracy. The data is conflicting about how government interactions improve trust. But let's pick up on this one question around AI and service delivery and the idea that you can automate that N of one type of model. I mean, one of the concerns I would have, and one of the things that you'd need to think about, is your governments ultimately end up being bureaucracies. And where we see the worst excesses of algorithms is that they speed up the bureaucratic mechanisms by factors of orders of magnitude. And we have an example in the UK where a few years ago some legislation came out which allowed for faster prosecutions because there was a big backlog in the criminal courts. And so people are getting conviction notices from the Driving and Vehicle Licensing Authority, the equivalent to the DOT in the US, for infringements. And because the process is through this accelerated system, there's no human touch point. And so there are stories of 76-year-old pensioners whose wives have died, who've been a week late paying their road tax and have ended up with criminal convictions because no one read their plea for mitigation. And that seems to me to be part of the challenge of putting AI and automated systems in here, which is bureaucracies have been driven, the political bureaucracies, to be more and more efficient since Reagan and Thatcher sort of rewrote the rules in Anglo-American politics. And that's what half of the promise of AI is. So how do you ensure that as those services get delivered, it is the more inclusive, more empathetic design of services rather than ones that are more rapier-like and just sort of steely-eyed and cold-hearted? I don't know who wants to pick that up. Right? How do you get them to design great systems rather than nasty, vindictive ones?
Well, I think the important thing to say is this problem predates AI, right? You can have more efficient government by putting more people on it, forcing them to move faster. So it's not necessarily, AI is not deterministic in that sense. It can enable a drive for efficiency. But there is also a burgeoning service design movement in government where forward-thinking departments are taking very seriously co-designing services with users. And I think that has got to be lent into more. And one of the benefits of AI being so front of mind in the public consciousness is this is a moment where we can start baking in these better design processes to government. And I think the forward-thinking leaders who've always been champions of this are doing that. So we shouldn't think of it as deterministic.
Oh, so then I want to come to you, Lisa, about how we think about the design of the sort of overarching system of democracy. So you said that democracy isn't just about the tick in the box every few years. There's a lot more going on. And I think it's also the case that we can have government by the people, for the people, in ways that isn't simply this representative at arm's length system. So when we think about AI, do we think that what it does is lead to more centralization back up to a central state, or do we think it creates opportunities for more decentralization, more subsidiarity, and more local and localized governance. And in a sense, what are those tensions and which would you prefer to see?
Well, if I can back up just a bit, if you think of a political leadership impact path, right? So from someone being recruited to go into politics to being trained, if they are, there's no license to be a politician, and we're looking into sort of should there be some sort of 21st century accreditation. Then there's recruitment by a party, then there's joining a party, it's not the same everywhere. Then there's getting elected or not, then there's the transition into office, and then there's being an elected official, and then there's the citizen saying whether you're good or not. So you just think about that whole path. AI has the opportunity to play in all of those places, and so do citizens. And I think AI is going to bring down the cost for citizens. So you could do much more crowdsourcing of potential candidates. We saw this in the Teal movement in Australia, where you had candidates that were much more centrist. They happened to be mostly women from their communities. They had a good track record. The citizens picked them and then knocked on their door and said, we want you to run. So all along that path, and I see nothing but opportunity. There's the doom, but the opportunity is along the running for office. Right now, AI makes political communications cheaper and faster. There's the bad side of that. But if you think of the 6.5 million people who run for office, every 4 years or whatever their mandate is, we want more representative government, which would increase trust. If we can get the tools to women candidates, for example, to do better targeting, to do better content creation, to speak in indigenous languages, like in Guatemala, there's some chatbots coming up where you can speak in different languages. I'm quite bullish on. I don't think we're going to see that this election, but I think in 2 to 4 years, if we really invest in the positive tools for AI in politics, I'm seeing much more inclusion and better outcomes.
Right. So does that, just coming back to my framing of centralization against decentralization, does that suggest that through this actual mechanism of practice and process, you end up with something that looks less centralized and less homogeneous?
100%. And just back to the elected piece. This is the promise. So I've been interviewing for a paper that we have coming out in a couple of weeks, experts on this, sort of where they see the opportunity. And the citizen engagement piece and the decentralization piece on the side of the curve, which is in the elected official curve, is just going up. They see massive opportunity for citizens' assemblies, for much more local decision making.
Adaptive policy making.
Adaptive policy making, not just cascading out this. Mario will know this. You don't take it, just cascade it out. You put it out, you test it, you change it, you test it. This is the promise of AI across that whole spectrum.
Robyn, you were nodding. Vigorous agreement or?
If it's designed right, because I think AI enables, obviously, rapid engagement with citizens. If you put humans at the right point in the loop, you can then devolve a lot of decision-making at the right level to local government, which there's generally a need for.
Can I just say one thing? The thing I worry most about this year, because we talked about the 4 billion people going to vote, I'm worried about the cynicism that has set in many of us about politics. Like, we've given up. How many people would consider running for office here? I mean, this is a problem, right?
Not even some of the people who are currently in office.
Yeah, which is
put
quite
their hands
interesting.
up, which is wonderful.
So what's happened is we've swallowed the cynicism pill, and I would say that the nefarious forces want that to happen. And the way to break cynicism is to spend time around the positive stories, is to be joyful about it, is to make it more efficient. It's not just transparency and accountability. It's getting closer. And I'd love you all to take a pledge to quit saying all politicians are X. You may disagree with them, because what is happening is people aren't going into office because we keep saying how bad it is. And then we get the sort of politicians that make us think that it's bad. We have control over this. We do not have to be cynical. We can change things. Don't fall for the doom and gloom. It's up to us. It's still our democracy. We can change it.
You can see why Lisa has been in politics for a long time. It's your natural calling. We're getting a red flashing zero sign on there, but it's just one last question just to build off that, and maybe just come to you, Robyn, because Lisa has expended a lot of energy there. Is if we think about this year, 2024, what is your sort of one item on your wish list that if you could make happen, that people could go off and do, would make a difference to how this year plays out? And I will give you mine first of all. So I think the one thing that I think could be helpful, and we still have time for, would be a voluntary agreement between parties to agree not to use AI for deepfakes and misinformation through any of their official or unofficial campaigns. Sign up, agree in your domain. It's going to be a leaky sieve, but at least it would be a signal. So that would be my one kind of practical wish. Would you have one?
And that's a great one, and it's hard to beat. And there's some interesting precedents for agreeing, actually rules of best practice predating this in emerging democracies.
Yeah.
Mine, though, which I don't think is quite as good as yours, but you've taken the best one, is I think leaders in government, so the leaders in elected officials and appointed civil servants, need to roll up their sleeves and need to use AI, because you cannot look at your child typing questions into ChatGPT and understand it. You have to use it. And unless it's used, it is not, you are not able to master it, you're not able to leverage it, and it becomes the enemy to be abused by bad actors.
Lisa, you've had a chance to recharge. Your wish for 2024.
I just want people to get involved, and I think because we're in this room, there's a lot of money being put towards tools and use of AI for the bad. We should start a fund here today to fund people using AI for good in democracy. There is not enough money going in. There's an arms race happening, and this room can make a big difference. Even if it's something you do on the side, we can raise money and build tools and make those tools real for humans. I think we can do that.
It's not even a race, because it's a one-horse
It's
race.
a one-horse, yeah, it is.
Well, thank you to Lisa and Robyn from Apolitical, apolitical.co.
And apolitical.foundation.
And apolitical.foundation. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.